Well, welcome to the Ask Podcast. We are back again with Greg Sheridan, looking at Christians, the urgent case. I've still got my book here, and we're coming up to Christmas, and we're chapter 5, and it's been preordained, predestined that we would be talking about angels. So my first question for you, Greg, is do you have an angel on top of your Christmas tree?
No, we have a star. We do have angels. We've got 2 Christmas trees, oddly enough, and we do have angels on both of them. But at the very top, we have a star.
Okay, well, the Star of Bethlehem. So we'll let you away with that. I'm just curious. I wasn't expecting you to do a chapter on angels. Why did you do that?
Well, there's several reasons, David. One is I love angels. We Catholics have a sacrament of confirmation at which we take a saint's name. The confirmation is meant to confer the gifts of the Holy Spirit. I chose the name of the Archangel Raphael, and I think he's a real good guy. And secondly, you need all the help you can get. And if there is a guardian angel, or if angels generally are there to help us, as it says in the New Testament that they are, well, I'm not going to deny their help. Thirdly, angels are one part of Christian theology which has maintained tremendous popular belief. So intellectuals may have scorned the virgin birth or scorned the divine or something, but normal human beings know that there are angels, and they believe in them very, very widely. Something like 77% of Americans and about half of Australians believe in angels. And then finally, David, or the final 2 reasons. One, I think angels are important theologically, but also Christianity is a supernatural faith. It relies on certain supernatural propositions. And one of the many ways in which you can deny Christianity is to try to reduce it to a sociological impulse to charity. Now, the social impulse to charity is a fantastic impulse. That's great. It's part of Christianity. But, if you took out all the miracles and all the angels from the Bible, you'd reduce it by about half or something. So why would you bother with it if half of it is lies? And I think we as Christians need to be very clear that ours is a supernatural faith. It rests on supernatural claims made by Christ and upheld by the Church, of which angels are an integral part.
They are. I'm sorry, I'm not wishing to be irreverent at all, but when you said Raphael, I just thought you were named after one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
He might have been named after the Archangel.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And, it is interesting, isn't it, though? Because, we're coming towards Christmas. And I'm sorry, I am one of these people who, watches It's a Wonderful Life, pretty well every Christmas. I think it's
Me too.
I think it's just an absolutely fabulous film. But that's interesting, the popular belief in angels, it remains so strong. I mean, it's really, do you have any explanation for that? I just find it intriguing. I don't know why.
Well, most human beings have a sense of God, even beyond the Christian tradition. And they have a sense of the spirit world. Now, Christianity liberates people from being terrified of the spirit world or being enthralled to the evil spirits or something. But it doesn't abolish the spirit world. It says that the spirit world is under the dominion of God. But some of the enemies of Christianity will say, well, there are elements of Christianity which are similar to all other religions, as though that's an argument against Christianity. I think rather it's an argument that God and the expectation of God are deep in the human DNA, and you find expressions of them in all religious sensibilities. And most people know that there are our evil spirits and there are our good spirits, our friends. I mean, this is not a question of the occult or something. But the popular belief, angels are a very comforting belief. They're our friends. They're there to help us. So in my book in my chapter on Christian culture, I referenced some of the movies. It's a Wonderful Life, certainly. And the very next year, the bishop's wife came out with Cary Grant playing the angel. Now that shows you the prestige of angels. They found the most charming guy on the whole planet, and he was the embodiment of an angel. But they continue in movies and books. So there was that movie a few years ago, Meet Joe Black, where Brad Pitt is an angel come to take Anthony Hopkins to heaven. And although it's not a very theology-heavy movie, there's a lovely line at the end, there's a lovely moment at the end where Anthony Hopkins says to Brad Pitt, his angel who's taking him away to eternal life, he says, should I be scared? And Joe Black says, a man like you, the life you've led, I don't think you need to be scared. And there's actually a whole world of theology, popular theology in that. Then we've had all these TV series, Touched by an Angel and so forth. Michael Landon is no Cary Grant, but he was a legitimate heartthrob. And, William Buckley remarked, David, I'm sure you'll be familiar with this, that he would rather be governed by the first 10 pages of the Boston phone book than by the whole of the Harvard faculty. And while I'm not against intellectuals or anything, I often think there is a certain wisdom in the common herd, the common herd of humanity. Common herd of humanity prays to God when it's in trouble, and it understands that there are angels there to help it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you're saying about there's a whole bunch of theology there. The theology that you just mentioned in that particular part, is really a theology of works. I've led a good life, so I'll be fine, which I don't think... I mean, and that is a popular belief, so it is... And it intrigues me that the popular belief in angels as something comforting, which is true, but in the Bible, they're also something terrific. I think Milton gets it better than It's a Wonderful Life, if I put it that way, in terms of theology, But speaking of theology, I want to take you, now you're very balanced in this, as always, so you cite the Pope and you cite Aquinas. But the two quotes that stuck out for me were from Calvin and Luther, who I think in Protestantism overall, there's not been a significant emphasis on angels, and maybe a reaction has caused us to go the opposite way. But let me give you the two quotes. So Calvin in the Institutes, on page 134, you say, angels are the dispensers and administrators of the divine beneficence towards us. They regard our safety, undertake our defence, direct our ways, and exercise a constant solicitude that no evil befall us. And then Luther in his Table Talk says, an angel is a spiritual creature without a body, created by God for the service of Christendom and the Church. These are actually marvellous quotes. Did you just find them, as you're doing your daily reading in the Institutes? Or
Look, I wish I could say I had, but I suspect... this might be a senior moment, but I can't actually remember exactly how I found them. But it may be that I was searching about angels rather. Although I did read quite a lot of books on angels, and one of the best was Billy Graham's book, God's Messengers. And Billy Graham echoes your comments. He says, why haven't I heard a lot of sermons about angels? He says, I've been preaching and going to church my whole life, and I've never heard a homily or a pastor speak about angels. And so Billy Graham, a very practical guy, says, okay, I'm going to tell you what we know about angels. And he writes this lovely little book, God's Messengers. It's only a couple hundred pages. It's not a doorstopper or anything, and full of wisdom. And indeed, I suspect that I may have got those references from his book. And then I found a lot of references to angels. I mean, the things which divide Christian denominations, certainly the belief in angels is not one of those. I mean, we might have, there might be disputes about this and that about them, but the basic idea that there are angels. And
sorry,
then,
Greg, I've lost you.
They're so dominant. They're so present in Scripture. They're there from Genesis all the way through the Old Testament, all the way through the New Testament. They're there at the beginning of the New Testament. The angel Gabriel comes to Mary, and they're there at the end of the New Testament in the book of Revelation with the archangel Michael, fighting the devil and so forth. Now, you're quite right. Angels are there to help us, but there are several episodes in the New Testament where the angels do a bit of smiting. There's no doubt about that in the Old and the New Testament. So angels are not to be trifled with. And, of course, we have to be careful not to be seduced into any kind of superstition or anything.
Greg?
Paul rails against apparent abuse by some people of apparently worshipping angels.
I think we got interrupted there, Greg, but we were talking about angels in portrayal, Calvin and Luther and others, and you mentioned Billy Graham. So do you want to just say something about that?
Yeah, so, David, I've been a lifelong admirer of Billy Graham's, and I attended one of his crusades in 1979, and I think he's one of the great figures of 20th century Christianity. And a very helpful book on angels was his book, God's Messengers. And he wrote it precisely because he said he'd never heard a pastor preach about angels. He'd been going to church all his life. He'd been conducting church services for a large part of his life, and he'd never heard a homily, a sermon, a talk about angels. And he thought that was a bit strange because angels are so central to the Bible, from the Old Testament right through the New. And so he wrote his lovely little book, God's Messengers. It's only a couple of 100 pages long. It's not a doorstopper or anything. It may very well have been there that I came upon the Calvin and Luther references. And it's a very practical, marvellous book, as you would expect from Billy Graham. And he just takes all the things that, well, not all of them, but he takes most of his information about angels, of course, he gets from the Bible. And the Bible has so much to say about angels. I don't see how you can take the Bible seriously and disregard angels. And, of course, the angels are also very important in some episodes of Jesus' life.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you're right about Billy Graham, by the way. That's still, I think, that's the standard book I would refer people to. So I do think in Protestant theology, there's not been a lot of emphasis, and that is why Graham wrote it. But I would say that in the kind of world in which we live, the idea of angelic beings or spiritual beings is one that for our ancestors, and to be honest, I think for the vast majority of the world today, is normal. But for a lot of Western materialists, that's been so, I think I would say, indoctrinated out of us that what remains of it is often a folk memory, or if not a cynical approach. And yet it's still the case that if you walk into a bookshop, you will find far more books on angels than you will find on any other spiritual subject. A normal secular bookshop.
It is a paradox. I think people have an intuition of God and they have a lesser intuition of angels. So, in this book I interviewed Peter Cosgrove about being a believing Christian in battle. And he refers to that old phrase, there are no atheists in foxholes, and he's respectful of the atheists he served with. But he said, when you are facing death, you tend to talk to God. And you also ask for help all the time. And, one of my favourite authors, J.R.R. Tolkien of Lord of the Rings, has very extensive correspondence about angels with his sons when they are going into battle. Mm-hmm. So this is not a mawkish dad. So Tolkien himself served in the First World War, like C.S. Lewis, in the trenches and so on, had some terrible experiences. And his son, one was in the Air Force and could well have been killed at any time. And he and his son had a correspondence, and Tolkien was saying, don't ever be scared to ask for the help of your guardian angel. And then they talk at length about... So some intellectuals still adhere to angels. The common folk do have a folk memory of it. Now, without being critical of any Christian tendency, even liberal Christianity, I myself don't understand the sort of tiny subset of Christians who say, I believe in Christianity, but the miracles didn't really happen, the virgin birth didn't really happen, the resurrection was not necessarily physical, and of course, I don't believe in angels. I mean, if you do that, half the Bible is rubbish. So if half of it is rubbish, why would you bother with it at all?
Well, and also, that doesn't make logical sense to me. That's like me saying, I believe that Greg Sheridan is a journalist in the Australian, but the Australian doesn't exist. There's no such thing as newspaper, and foreign affairs are just, sexual things, So, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to say, on the one hand, I believe in something, and then deny the things that you say you believe in.
That's right. I mean, you'll forgive me, David, for being the first one to revert to Chesterton in this discussion, but he has a lovely sentence. He says that attitude is like deploring drunkenness and then not believing in gin. You're sorry that fella is drunk, but you don't believe there's such a thing as whiskey or gin that got him drunk.
Yeah, I think I told you this before, but I still love it. When I came out of hospital 10 years ago and there was so many cards waiting for me, I'd been seriously ill and I'd been dying, and a couple of militant atheists had written to me, or had written a card saying, "We're praying for you." And my only response was to write them back and say, "To whom?"
Well, that's very nice atheists.
They were very nice, yes. It's funny, everyone loves you when you're dying, by the way. If you feel your popularity is waning,
Well, I'm very glad you didn't die, and I'm glad you're with us still. Clive James, who took a long time to die, was very funny about how he'd been doing his exit act for a long time, and people got a bit tired of it.
Yeah, I mean, but it's funny though, the angelic thing, because you're very good, by the way. I've got my notes of what you wrote in front of me, and you've anticipated every single one of the next subjects. So I'm going to really test you and see what you know the next one will be. But you mentioned Tolkien already, and that intrigues me because Tolkien didn't speak of angels as some kind of little Daily Mail figure on your shoulder, whispering into your ear, and demons whispering into the other ear. He had this sense of grandeur, and he really did believe in angels. I mean, and he would say he had some experience. Now, I think my own experience of the spiritual world in that way is fairly limited, and I think that is the case for most people. The appearance of angels is not that frequent in the Bible. But I would say that there have been a couple of occasions when I've been aware of spiritual forces, both good and evil. Have you ever had any experience like that yourself, or?
Well, David, as you asked me, I'll tell you, but not something I really make a song and dance of. I did refer to it in a previous book, When We Were Young and Foolish. I had a year in a junior seminary, seeing if I might become a Redemptorist priest. And they had a beautiful chapel, and I used to go in the chapel a lot to pray. And you never really, as an Aussie bloke, you never really want anyone to come and discover you in prayer. That would be a bit embarrassing. So I used to go up into the choir loft to pray there. And one day I saw on the altar a translucent figure of radiant beauty in white, and this was perplexing and a bit astonishing, and but she wouldn't go away, and finally I came down from the choir loft to see what was going on, and as I came down, when I emerged from the choir loft, she was no longer there. So I have recounted this as an incidental experience in a previous book, but the reason I'm very reluctant to recount it or talk about it, but at the same time I feel a journalist's duty to say the truth and to say what happened. So that happened to me, and there it is.
Yeah, I think our experiences can never be proof for other people.
No.
But they, on the other hand, what we do experience, other people have to cope with that and say, okay, what was going on then? What was happening then? I mean, we feel the same at one level. I often think, the Christmas story, the shepherds and the angels coming, and I think in the old AV version it says that they were sore afraid, to which my response was, yeah, you bet. I'd be absolutely terrified if things like that happened, So again, I think that comes back to the majesty of the angels as well, the angelic beings, and but experiences like that, they're both a wonder and they freak you out as well, and they can be confusing as well at times, because you wonder what's happening.
Absolutely, yeah, and you don't like to talk about them because you feel that you're diminishing them or demeaning them. And B, you feel that your life has been so rackety and such a mess, you plainly haven't lived up to the generosity and the kindness you were shown. And C, you don't want people to mock religion because they mock your foolish testimony. But at the end of the day, you have a fidelity to the truth. So you have to tell the truth.
Yeah, and it is, but it is our experience or our truth, and there are things, there are things that we just can't explain or we don't know. And I mean, I'm not going around claiming that I speak to angels every day, or you have these kinds of experiences, but sometimes you do, and Tolkien was one of them. Now, another interesting thing you bring in here is Viktor Frankl. So it's funny, we've got so much in common, because Man's Search for Meaning is, to me, a book I've read and I read and reread. Why did you mention Viktor Frankl in terms of angels?
I'm so glad that Viktor Frankl holds that place for you, David, as well as for me. Certainly, it's one of the books which has had a great influence on my life. I read it first, 30 years ago or 40 years ago or something, and it's been an important book for me ever since. So Viktor Frankl was a Jewish psychiatrist who was spent 3 years in labour and death camps in under Nazi occupation, and his wife was in a different camp from him, and she died, and he had no notification of that. And his book, Man's Search for Meaning, is really an attempt to make spiritual and psychological and human sense out of this experience. And Frankl remained a religious believer and said that what human beings need more than anything else in their lives is meaning. But the reason I refer to him in this particular chapter is because he recounts a time when he's in a labour camp rather than a death camp, and he's being driven to labour. They're walking to labour, but they're being abused by the guards, and if they fall over, they get smacked by the guards and hit with sticks and so forth. It's a humiliating and physically painful experience in every way. And he finds himself in the midst of this contemplating the face of his wife. And his only desire, of course, he'd like to have been out of the Nazi camp and free and everything, but his only desire at that moment was to have a few seconds where he could contemplate the face of his wife. And he recognises in the end that love is at the centre of the human being. And he makes the comparison. He says all he wanted to do was just contemplate her image, just conjure her image in his mind, the beautiful face of his wife. And he understood for the first time the passages in the Bible about the angels lost in perpetual worship and singing the praises of God, and lost in perpetual contemplation of God. And he understood the vocation of the angels, as it were. He wasn't saying that his wife was God or anything like that. This was a deeply human response. And I think it was just a glint of insight into part of the vocation of angels, which is one of the jobs they do is to help us, and one of the jobs they do is to praise and know and contemplate God.
Mm-hmm. I love that, and I particularly that phrase, the angels are lost in perpetual contemplation of an infinite glory, which I think describes the role of angels. But you've also mentioned there the role of them as messengers and helpers. And I was particularly struck just right at the end of the chapter with this thing about children, where Matthew 18:10, Jesus says, "Take care that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you in heaven, their angels continually see the face of my Father in heaven." I mean, if Jesus hadn't said that, I would say that was some kind of, Hallmark style theology, you know what I mean? That it's
yes.
It seems a bit cute, a bit just too, but Jesus says it, and he says it very strongly, and it's very clear. And I think it's actually a wonderful thought. Do you want to say anything more about that before we go?
Yeah, absolutely. So all through the Gospels, there are a lot of themes of Jesus in the Gospels, one of which is that he rewards persistent prayer. Another of which is that he has a particular care for children. And I believe everybody and every sin can be forgiven if they repent. But a sin which injures children is really a grave, grave, grave sin. And he tells us this. Jesus tells us this in his own words. He's not accustomed to telling lies, and I think we have to take that pretty seriously. There's a special mystery in the innocence of children. And then, of course, this passage affirms angels again. They're angels in heaven. Look constantly on the face of my Father. So Jesus is not going to make this up. There it is. It's their angels. And in this beautiful book of Marilyn Robinson's Gilead, the preacher John Ames, reflects that this passage has given consolation to hundreds of millions of Christians throughout the ages. And it is, I think, one of the great consoling passages in the Bible, that the most innocent and the most powerless of human beings are a special concern of God. And indeed, he sends his messengers. Among the many ways he helps them is to send his messengers, the angels, to help them as well.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I was at a school yesterday, Redeemer Baptist in North Parramatta, and it was just incredible. They have 500 pupils, being Parramatta, very multi-ethnic. And I particularly, when I looked to my right as I was speaking, there was the preschoolers, Koreans, Chinese, Indians, European, indigenous, African, just incredible. And you do feel that compassion, and you also feel maybe that sense of wanting to protect, but also a sense of shame at sometimes when the church has, I think child abuse in the church, I find it difficult to conceive of anything worse. And, not just the Catholic Church, but other churches as well have had that. And that's just been appalling, hasn't it?
It is. It's the worst thing I've ever known about the Christian church.
Yeah.
And it's as bad as anything that has ever been done by Christians. So Christians, they don't gain exemption from the human condition by being Christians. They're still we're still a fallen race. They're still flesh and blood. They're still prone to the temptations. It's almost impossible to understand child abuse, I think. And, it recalls the line of Solzhenitsyn that the line between good and evil runs down the centre of every human heart. Some of these people who engaged in child abuse did start out with good intentions and sometimes heroic virtue and shocking vice. And not a million miles away, it's a precipice that people tread over. But in sum, I agree with you. It is the worst thing I've ever known about Christians.
Yeah. Well, I would say it's the worst. I mean, I do seriously question the Christianity of anyone who gets involved in that. But what I would say also is, paradoxically, what you referred to there is the love of Christ and the love of God for children, and this provision of angels. I sometimes mistakenly refer to my granddaughters as angels. Funny how we always think of girls as angels but not boys, whereas
I don't think that's so funny, to tell you the truth.
But the angels are sexless. I think that's the view of an angel, which is not a biblical one, but never mind. Greg, I mean, it's really good to think of all of that as at Christmas, and as we head towards Christmas, I think this is a really good subject to think about. Thank you again for being
David,
so
can
willing.
I add one final?
Yeah, sure.
Can I add one final thought? Just not to take us back to child abuse, but a book that I didn't cite in this book, but that is a really wonderful book, is called Child Arise, by a child abuse survivor and a woman who later became a nun. And it's a book of biblical and other meditations on the solidarity of Jesus in people's suffering and the kind of biblical and spiritual reflections that an abuse survivor, that helps an abuse survivor deepen their faith. And so, I mean, ending on the note of abuse is a terrible note to end on. I apologise for that, but I just I had planned to do a whole chapter on this, and it just became too big. It would have been a different book. It would have been a new, wholly different book. But I would refer people to this lovely book called Child Arise. Of gentle meditations on that. But putting that aside, I think angels are a cheerful subject. I I agree they're sexless, but I'm not surprised that they're associated with women because they're nurturing and they're gentle and they're healers. The archangel I chose for my confirmation name, Raphael, is the patron angel of healing, and women tend to be better at this than blokes, like a lot of other things.
You're so, you're such a misanthropist. You're such a sexist. We'll need to sort this out when we get past Christmas. But Greg, again, thank you. It's always good to talk to you. I do think this actually. I think there's much more to this subject, and I do think it's really, really important, and to recognise the spiritual world. And also, by the way, it says in Hebrews that when you show hospitality to people, you're entertaining you could be entertaining angels unaware. So it's, angels could come in the form of human beings. So anyway, when you make it to Artarmon, or when you make it to Sydney, we'll take you to Artarmon and we'll entertain you as an angel, okay?
David, that's given me every incentive to be there. Thank you very much. I really have enjoyed our discussion so much. Thank you.
All right. God bless. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, David. That was